Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. We're going to be speaking in the next half hour about privacy risks from data that is collected and stored by vehicles. And I have with me Andrea Amico. He's from Privacy for Cars. My name is Randy Henrick. We're going to talk with you about some of these risks that many dealers are not aware of and possible liability issues as well. I am principal of Randy Henrick and Associates. We're a dealer compliance consulting firm. We do deal audits, we do regulatory and compliance advice, policies, programs, web-based training, anything your dealers may need, and we work with lenders as well. Andrea, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you?
Thank you. I'm the founder of Privacy for Cars. We started over 6 years ago to look into the issue of personal information captured by vehicles. And this has increasingly become a regulatory issue, as you will hear from us later today. We work with a number of organizations, especially in the wholesale arena. So we're partners with some of the largest auto auctions in the country. And indirectly, we serve many auto lenders, fleet management companies, and dealerships.
Very good. Let's start today with a video.
If question 1 passes in Massachusetts, anyone could access the most personal data stored in your vehicle. Domestic violence advocates say a sexual predator could use the data to stalk their victims, pinpoint exactly where you are, whether you are alone, even take control of your vehicle. Vote no on 1. Keep your data safe.
See, it's not just consumer advocates, regulators, or plaintiff attorneys that are pushing this narrative. It's the automakers themselves. What you saw is one of the many 30-second ads that ran on television in Massachusetts over the last 2 months in an effort to kill the Proposition 1, which is about right to repair. And unfortunately, they portray correctly what is actually happening with used cars. What you see on this page is a profile that we built just by visiting a dealership and test driving a vehicle that I had for sale. Was a former lease. So let me be clear. All it took was a 30-second video of the infotainment. And the reason why we could do this, and anybody can do this, is because neither the former owner, nor the grounding dealer, nor the captive finance company, nor the auction, nor the buying dealer took care of deleting this non-public personal information. And much more is possible. Watch this video.
I don't think, and this is something you talked about before, people realize that when they sync a device to a car, just how much data goes over.
Right. I'll give you a good example. So we rent cars quite frequently. We recovered 70 phones that had been connected to it, all of their call logs, their contacts, and their SMS history, as well as their music preferences, songs that were on their device, and some of their Facebook and Twitter things as well. When you plug it into the USB port, it's going to charge your phone, absolutely, and as soon as it powers up, it's going to start sucking all your data down into the car. There's one manufacturer in particular that will ask you, do you want to download your contact list? And of course, you know, being a rental car, you would say no, and it honors that one thing, but it takes everything else that it can get its hands on. It's funny. I mean, they actually said, well, people care about their contact list, and little do they know that their entire text messaging database is being sucked down onto the car. Yeah, so Bluetooth's interesting too, because if you connect it over Bluetooth, which is, a lot of states nowadays have this hands-free, everything has to be hands-free, you can't actually hold the phone up because you might get distracted. And if you connect it over Bluetooth, you get a whole different set of information. Very similar things, but you get more in some cases. It's quite comical when you sit back and read some of the text messages.
There's a lot of people that keep confidential information on their phone. They connect to it. Mm-hmm. Now someone can get to their confidential information through the car.
Yep.
And these are the statistics. We perform audits on a regular basis. This data, excluding for rental vehicles, is all from 2020. And these are all vehicles that are being resold. And as you can see, for fleet management companies, 89% of them contain personal information. For total loss vehicles, 91% of the vehicles that can collect personal information actually still have it when they arrive at the total loss yard. For repos, the number is 86%. And a staggering 97% of a lease return portfolio still contain the personal information of the previous owners. And by that, we mean things like the home address, the garage door codes, the previous destinations, any information from the phones, the same things you just heard in the video that you just watched before.
Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about some recent troubling litigation in this area. And it's had its genesis, as all litigation does, in California, where plaintiffs' class action lawyers have brought actions against vehicle rental companies, but they could equally bring them against dealers, auto auctions, and other entities that take used vehicles into their possession or control. And the argument is that the vehicles have stored non-public personal information of consumers who rented the vehicles, and that the vehicle rental companies did not take reasonable steps to delete the stored information and protect the privacy of consumers. Another count in the lawsuits alleges that this violates the rental company's privacy policies. The privacy notices say that we do not share information that we capture, and that by giving the vehicles to additional customers and third parties who are able to extract the vehicle data, and Andrea is going to talk a little bit about how they do that, you are sharing the data of customers contrary to your privacy policies, contrary to the customer's consent, and if the customer has opted out, in violation of law. And state law comes into play here as much as federal law does. And I'm going to play a little clip here to tell you a little bit about how the FTC, which is looking into this very issue, tends to view dealer violations.
Companies being looked at, but maybe individuals that work with those companies as well. Can you talk a little bit about some of the personal?
Yes, absolutely, Sean. That's a very good point. You know, you'll see after Dodd-Frank, we did ramp up our auto enforcement, and a lot of the cases we brought focused only on the dealerships. Now, more and more, you're going to see individuals also being the subject of our cases. Sean's absolutely right. Those three cases, the Passport Toyota case, you know, all of these cases, we've looked at individuals as well. And, you know, one thing I'll say about our commissioners is our current slate is very focused on individual liability. There's a concern that if you just look at companies and sue the companies and you're not kind of naming the parties that could have prevented the bad acts from occurring, that you're kind of letting some of the conduct slide and you are not appropriately incentivizing the owners of companies to make sure that they're abiding by the law.
That was the Federal Trade Commission, one of their senior officials in the Consumer Protection Division, speaking about how the Federal Trade Commission looks to individuals as well as dealerships and companies, and this has been their regular pattern and practice for the last several years. NIADA rated privacy as the #2 regulatory risk for dealers after recalls. And there are 4 separate guidance documents that the FTC has put out about the issue of non-public information left in vehicles. And the FTC deletion rule requires you to delete non-public personal information that you no longer have a need for or a use for. And of course, there is the FTC Gramm-Leach-Bliley privacy rule risk, which we talked about earlier, where dealers don't indicate that they store this information, indicate that they don't share information, and in fact, by transporting in vehicles that don't have the information deleted, they do exactly that. In addition to the federal regulation risks, there are state risks. There are state privacy laws, and the one in California is particularly egregious and requires actually opt-in consent in certain situations. And about 1/3 of the states have proposals in their legislature to copy or build upon the California consumer privacy law. California is where privacy started some 2 decades ago. States also have unfair and deceptive acts and practices laws. We call them UDAP laws. All 50 states have them. Unfair and deceptive acts and practices mean whatever the regulator wants it to mean. It's something that's anti-consumer, somehow unfair or deceptive, such as a deceptive statement in a privacy notice, such as collecting information of consumers without telling them about it, without properly deleting it, as is the case with vehicles that collect data. And a number of states, California, New York, Massachusetts, Delaware, and Texas and Illinois come to mind, are particularly active in this area. States have data security laws. And Andrea, I'm going to ask you to talk about those and about the biometrics in Illinois.
Yeah, so I think a lot of people think that this is a very recent issue and it's driven by the new privacy laws that are passing in the country. By the way, there's a growing amount of states that are working on new legislation. But reality is that if you look at the relatively old state data security laws, those laws clearly cover electronic devices and information stored in those electronic devices. And so while those laws were not written thinking about vehicles, the nature of what modern vehicles are able to do and the nature of the data that is collected by those vehicles actually do meet the definitions in those laws. And as you can see here, 32 states have in their statute specific requirement for government, but 24 have it for business. So for instance, if you do business with a government fleet, there's a whole host of states that have requirements on that. If you do business with regular fleets or with other business customers, or you are a business yourself, then you have to deal with those other 24 laws. Regarding Illinois, that's one of the most litigated pieces of legislation today. There's over 200 class action lawsuits in Illinois for this biometric law that is, I think, 4 or 5 years old. And what most people fail to recognize is that many vehicles today capture biometrics. Anything from your voice prints to your face, your retina, and all of that data, again, falls under the biometric law of Illinois, and several other states are doing similar laws. And actually some cities already do have those kind of provisions, especially for facial recognition.
So let's talk about some of the legal risks of information in vehicles. The recent litigation, the class action litigation, highlights the privacy risk to all dealers that acquire or sell used vehicles. And consumers are all similarly situated in this category. So unless there's an arbitration clause that a court would apply to dismiss the class action, it should be very, very easy for a court to certify a class and bring with it the costs and expenses of defending and litigation and discovery in a class action. The FTC has indicated it's looking into collection and storage of vehicle data, and you heard one of their senior officials talking about how when they find liability, they want to assess individuals as well as the corporations. And you don't want to be the financial institution that passes along unprotected consumer data in vehicles. You want to build a data deletion process, and I'm going to ask Andrea to talk about that a little bit, to cover every vehicle you acquire, whether it's by trade-in, auction, otherwise, as well as vehicles that you rent to customers, loaner vehicles and the like, in your fleet of vehicles. And you want to consider referencing vehicle data in your safeguards and data destruction policies, as well as in your privacy notice. Your privacy notice says how do we collect your personal information? Consider adding a phrase that says data collected by vehicles. Andrea, do you want to go through the recommendations?
Sure. So here's some recommendations for you. The first thing is we're seeing a growing number of companies that now have not only policies, but processes in place, especially adoptions, to delete the non-public personal information from the vehicles. And all you need to do in most cases is just to reach out to your existing auction partners and ask them to remove the data and make sure that the process behind it is robust. Now, the reason why I'm telling you you need more than a policy is because we do a number of audits. So for instance, recently, we looked at a sample of dealerships. Not only 3/4 of dealerships did not have a policy, and so of course, it was not surprising we could find personal information in the cars for sale on their lot, but of the 1/4 of dealers that declared to consumers that they did have a policy, over 3/4, we still found them out of compliance. And I think that, Randy, if there's one thing that is worse than not having a policy, is having one and not following it. And so just make sure that you just don't have a policy. This is something that if you have questions, please come to our website and ask, because that's really our specialty, to put together a process that is measurable. Because as with everything in compliance, yes, you need to have a policy. Yes, you need to train your people to do it. But if you don't have the receipts to prove that you're actually doing it in a serious manner and that you have process controls in place, that's where your liabilities can become significant.
It's very important that you consider this issue, that when you take a vehicle in, that you follow the manufacturer's guidelines, or that you hire a independent service to help you delete the information. Because when you put that vehicle into the stream of commerce, you're putting the customer's non-public personal information with it, and that can lead to identity theft and something that can be led back to your dealership. That can be an unfair and deceptive act in practice. It can give consumers rights against you in various states, and it's a fairly simple problem to fix. And Andrea, how would you suggest a dealer go about fixing the deletion of data from vehicles it takes in on trade, or that it buys from auction where the vehicles haven't had the information deleted?
Yeah, I think the first thing that they should do is to assess the risk. And you really don't need a lot of fancy tools. I think you can also do those assessments in-house if you want to. Just pick a sample of 30, 40, 50 vehicles that you have for sale and go through the menus and see how many of them have synced phones or previous destinations or home address, etc. And this way you start to have a rough idea about whether this is an issue that you should address or not. Once you decide to address it, you can, again, try to solve it in-house. And if you do that, again, make sure that you have a process that is robust, repeatable, and measurable. Again, you need to make sure you keep track of every VIN you deleted and have some sort of trackable receipt of that. Or you can rely on somebody like us. This is really what we specialize on. And you can just scan the VIN, follow our simple process. It's really very easy, and most people don't need any training on it whatsoever. And you will have at your fingertips the compliance records you need to protect your own dealership.
With that, we'll take a number of questions that have come in. One question for Andrea is, what states have you seen particularly interested in this issue? And have you seen any lawsuits or threatened lawsuits outside of California?
That's a great question. So first of all, California was the first place where we really started to have a lot of requests. And so, for instance, California was well over 3/4 of our book of business until the summer. And we see a rapid evolution, especially with the auto finance companies. We see them creating policies that really are across the United States. And there's, I think, two reasons for that. The first one is that it's easier to manage as a process, as anything in compliance. Doing a patchwork of different compliance procedures is just really hard to keep track of, and it's just very easy to do missteps and fall out of compliance. So having a blanket policy is helpful. But the other thing is that one of the criteria that CFPB and other regulator look at is always, are you treating all consumers the same? And so even though legislation in certain states may be more aggressive than others, again, many of the largest auto finance companies in the country and remarketers and fleets, etc., are taking the position that it's better to set up one process and just follow it religiously across the board, no matter whether the vehicle is remarketed.
Very good. Andrea, another question's come in. Do manufacturers make available to dealers instructions on how to delete information from their vehicles?
Yeah, so let me address this one. So first of all, every vehicle has a manual, and in theory, the instructions are there. I can tell you that over the years, we've reached out to many times to manufacturers and tell them that the instructions in the manual were not correct. But we haven't really been able to see any changes to those manuals. We also have tried multiple times to call their call centers and ask for help on deleting personal information to see what would happen. And, you know, right now the results are that in 50% of the cases, they're not helpful, meaning that they don't know how to guide a consumer to remove the information. And in the other half, it takes at least 15 minutes just to get a human on the line, and typically 2 or 3 levels of escalation. So in theory, the tools are there. In practice, it's not a good process to have for your dealership. I mean, you want to make sure you do this in a way that is rapid, efficient. And again, how can you prove that you have records? Because if you're supposed to call the 20, 30 different makes that you have on your lot, you know, imagine how complex it will be to try to get the records from the manufacturers themselves and accumulate them. It's just probably, you know, it's too much effort for the average business.
And I think one thing we've heard some talk about is possible lawsuits being brought against manufacturers for building vehicles in such a way that they collect this data and make it difficult to dispose of. Haven't seen that yet, but it's certainly something that's gotten some regulator attention and some plaintiffs' lawyers' attention. Andrea, I think we're about out of time. If people want to contact us, they can do that, and we will be available through NAF as well. You can reach me at autodealercompliance.net, or my email address is autodealercompliance@gmail.com. Andrea, what's your email address?
Yeah, and you can reach us through our website, which is privacy4cars.com. It's privacy4cars.com. Or you can send an email at info@privacy4cars.com, and we will be delighted to talk to you and see if we can help you.
Thank you very much, and thanks all for joining us today.
Thank you.